to be able to conduct this webinar today, to be amongst many of you who are impacting lives all over Asia. So for us at Our Better World, in the last few years, we have been building this digital storytelling platform of the Singapore International Foundation in a way that what was important in learning the effects of storytelling as well as what was happening on digital space and how do we result that into social impact. So today I'm going to share with you some of our learnings and I hope it would be useful in very practical ways so that you can apply that for your nonprofits or social enterprises in different ways and how you can then highlight the heart and give legs, to travel far for what you do. So I'm going to start off giving an overview of what we do at Our Better World before I get into the learnings. I always like to start with this quote. And why I like this quote, people think that stories are shaped by people. In fact, it's the other way around. Because it illustrates the impact of storytelling. Ask yourself, when was the last time you heard a story that shaped your perspectives and actions? Or when was the last time you watched a movie and made you think harder about your choices in life? Stories are powerful. That's because they're narratives of our human experiences. Stories connect us as people. They reflect our shared humanity and they shape us. I'm going to show you illustration of what I mean by that. This is a video that I think Jet would have sent you a link to watch on YouTube. Maybe we could play that, or you all could watch it right now.
Yes, all right. So due to broadcasting limitations of Citrix, we'll be sending you the link over chat. Kindly access that link if you haven't received my email earlier. So if not, please do access the link over chat and we will give you a few minutes. This is roughly about 3 minutes, 8 seconds. Just a quick, kind of like a quick video of what Rebecca and Our Better World has done. And here you go. We will continue with the session in about 3 minutes. All right, guys, I hope you were able to watch it. And Rebecca, shall we continue?
Yes.
All right.
So that's an example of a story that we told a few years ago. And the awareness of that resulted in more people booking ecotourism packages. And this resulted in the egg-shell fishermen becoming tour guides and earning a decent livelihood. So across all the stories that we tell of people doing good across Asia, they have actually resulted in actions in a whole variety of ways that resulted in stories getting more awareness, more volunteers, and more partners coming forward, or in some cases, more donations. And that's because for each story that we tell, there's a different call to action that's customized to the nonprofit social enterprises that we feature. And then you may ask at a broader front, what do we actually do? The next slide. Yeah, so a few years ago, actually it was 5.5 years ago, we identified a problem. A lot of nonprofits and social enterprises have no capability or resources to tell their own stories. And on the other hand, we saw this opportunity. There was a whole lot of online audiences who want to do good, but they don't know where to look. And that's where we come in. We tell stories to reach people where they are, and give them an accessible way to contribute. And so that's the way that we connect two groups of people, those who need help and those who can help. Next. Yeah.
Just a bit of lag.
Next. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And so over the last few years, we've grown an online community of over 500,000 across key markets in Asia. And last year alone, we've hit over 18 million online views, and last year over 4 million interactions, including story actions. Impact is very important to us, and so we also measure this by asking our community in the annual community survey. Out of 10 people, 7 were inspired and want to contribute in some ways, and 4 took some level of action where they donated, volunteered, or supported the causes. And so for us, we measure overall quantitative measures. At the same time, we also measure at a story level the before and after of the social impact. And so I thought it would be interesting to illustrate to you what I mean. This is Alicia. Last year, she watched one of our stories, and this was a story of a nonprofit in Malaysia that actually helps people with disabilities to dive in the open sea. The call to action for that story was calling for volunteers. And so she actually volunteered for this Malaysian dive, and she was so inspired, she came back to Singapore and started Dive Without Barriers, which is then a nonprofit in Singapore that enables people with disabilities to dive. So this is an example of someone who watched our story online and went on to take action, and it's the ripple effect of that. Next slide. Sometimes it's not in the doing, but sometimes it's in the sharing. You see Charlotte there. She watched the story of Running Hour, where it's getting able-bodied volunteers to be running buddies to the visually impaired and intellectually challenged. She loved the story, but she herself doesn't run, so she sent it to a friend who loves to run, and a friend actually went to volunteer. So for us, all forms of actions are important. As you can see in the next slide, many a times we represent ourselves like a dandelion. The seeds are actually the stories that we tell, and as we blow it, as we spread it on the digital space, it takes root in different places and different hearts, and it results in action in a variety of ways. And we feel that whether it's a share, whether someone has taken action like Alicia, it all adds up. And we've seen that impact spread in just tremendous ways. And you may then ask, then what makes an OBW story? The next slide. We always make sure that we tell the stories that are hopeful in a way that's inspiring, that's very real and authentic, that's not manufactured, and it's empowering and accessible to someone on the online space who says, I want to do something and I can contribute in some way. So it's not preachy, it doesn't guilt trap you into it. And we always make sure that it gives dignity and celebrates the people whom we profile. So this is the very core of how we make sure that when we tell these stories, it's told in the right way that's empowering, and that's important. And then at the very core of how we do this is we're anchored in the values of humility, compassion, and authenticity, because these are the values that guide us in the stories that we tell, in who we work with as filmmakers, writers, and photographers to tell these stories, and even the partners that we work with. And our dream in the next slide is to grow to be a global sustainable movement, where we're really connecting those who need help with those who can help through stories of good. And we haven't seen someone exactly like us that focuses on stories from Asia. And we know that there's only going to be that number of stories we can tell. And that's why I'm getting on to the next part, because it's important that we share the learnings we've had to empower nonprofits like yourselves to say, these are things you could take note of. And as you go about in the treasure trove of stories that you have on a day-to-day basis, how do you actually translate that and communicate that to a wider audience? So we see our role, as much as we are telling these stories and learning that each day, is a very important part of what we do in sharing that with all of you too. So I'm going to take this next section in kind of like step by step, and then we'll take questions right at the end. There are two parts to it, which is telling stories of the why and how to tell your story, and the inspiring action is how do you reach and engage your audience. So let me start off by why tell your story. What is the objective of telling your story? It tends to be usually in a few key areas in the next slide. Lag. The next slide.
Apologies for the delay there. Sorry. So it's hang on.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Be clear about the objective. Is the reason to raise awareness? Is it for partnerships? Is it for donations? Is it pitching to an investor? Or are you looking for volunteers? Being clear about why the objective is the starting point. The next slide. And then being clear about who your audience is, because storytelling needs to be customized and catered depending on your objective and depending on your audience, because you could be doing a storytelling to an investor, a potential, not investor, but a potential donor, or it could be a potential volunteer, and you realize that then which story you choose and how you tell the story then would have to vary. So these two would be really the key starting point. And when you convey the compelling truth at the foundation of your cause, it draws people in. Many times people will ask you, so what do you do? And many times we reply by answering the what. However, the next slide will show. The truth many a times is the why. And the why is the essence of your story. And so that is important to bear in mind. So you may ask, so what does A Better World do? So yes, we tell stories of people doing good in Asia, but the why is that because we believe in the power of stories that can inspire hearts into action, right? So that is important to many times communicate the why. And we've actually seen across the stories that we've told, these simple elements tend to actually make a story work. Many times it's the big inspiration. We don't give our audiences too much info that that just confuses things. And many times it's a simple action. All right, so across the different stories that we evaluate and say, is this a compelling story? Does this, and how do we tell that to bring about that inspiration? We give some level of info, but it's not too much. But we always make sure that there's like a simple action that people say, okay, I can get involved in some way. Next slide. Um, oh, okay. And what I mean, have a read on this quote. What we see is really crucial in what makes a good story is it first must be relatable. Uh, it needs to be memorable and it's shareable. You ask yourself which are the stories that click to you. Many times it needs to relate to you. It needs to, many times you remember it, and many times you share it with others, right? The next slide. And these tend to be the ingredients. It's moving, it's usually a journey, it resonates, it's authentic and real, and it's simple, it's not complicated. And like I said, it passed the true test when it gets shared. Not necessarily just shared on social media, but if you hear a powerful story, you hear yourself sharing that with your friends and family. People don't want more information. What they really want, next slide, is they want to feel, they want to share the emotion, and they want to make an impact. And so that's very important to bear in mind what makes a good story. And next, how do you actually find your most compelling story? Next slide. Many a times it's looking at the whys in different people and places. And we meet so many nonprofits and different people who work in nonprofits, and we say that actually many a times you all are actually have so many stories that are that come by you on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes it's about the consciousness around it. And we've seen that most of the stories that come through conversations, whether it's conversations with your beneficiaries, conversations with your volunteers, conversations with your partners on the ground. And a few key tips that we always go by is, number one, look beyond the obvious. Hidden behind the what we do, look for the uncommon angles. Whether it's an ex-convict who teaches gangsters to dance, a fisherman who runs a library, what are the aspects that stand out differently? Second, ask good questions. They need to be open-ended. The whys, the whats, the hows. Number three, you need to listen well. As you meet so many different people and have so many conversations, then just as how you listen like it's a date, right? What are the different aspects that gets people excited? What are things that are life-changing to people? How have lives been impacted? These are things you take note of. And then you listen to yourself. Which are the aspects of what you do that you share with your closest friends and family? And what gets you excited? And look at the response that you get from your friends and relatives or people that you share it with. Because many a times those that get people excited, that get you excited about sharing, are the gems of the stories. And that's about also testing it out, testing different stories and see what resonates. Because as I mentioned earlier, what makes a good story, it needs to be relatable, it needs to be memorable and shareable. All right, and that's where that counts. So after you have identified a story, then next is, how do you tell your story? And there are different considerations to that. Next slide. You need to be clear about what your goal and message is. What's that one thing to an audience that you want the audience to feel and to do? Not many things, but one thing. And when you're clear about that one thing, the next step is take care of the other aspects of the story basics. The what, the how, the when, the where, the who. And then the next aspect is there are many different formats of how you can tell the story. And so it doesn't mean that every time video is the best format, because for video, yes, it is able to capture visually emotions and brings you on a journey. But at the same time, there are many elements that need to come together to make that work, where the story subjects are very comfortable in front of camera, and there is a very strong story arc that can be worked out. Or maybe sometimes it can just be very compelling visuals. then in that case, maybe a photo essay would do that better. And sometimes you may feel that, oh, it's a flow, it's a journey, it's certain facts and figures you want to put in place, then maybe infographics could help complement the story. And sometimes it could be text on a social media post or an online text article that would do the job. So many times it depends on what the story is. Then you ask yourself, how is the best way to then tell the story? And it could sometimes be a variety of different formats that brings the story out. And then the next part is, where would you then share your story? Because that's important. That's where you then reach your audience. So in this context of digital, the next slide, is why go social? Because then you meet your audience where they are and you draw them in. The next slide will also show you how the internet would be in just 3 years' time. It's going to be phenomenal. Next slide. In terms of social network users, smartphone owners, video consumption on mobile, and how lifestyle will be consolidated on platforms. With all that exponential growth on the digital space, next slide, I will always recommend that we, rather than get into every single social media platform, it's always good to start with one. Start with one and do well on one. And when you recognize that, okay, you've done well on one and you can expand and reach other audiences on other platforms, then expand from that. Because otherwise, if you are into too many platforms at the same time, it'll be hard to manage. And to choose which platform will work best for you, you need to understand what each platform's strength and focus is, and and to say which are the platforms best suit your needs. So take, for example, for Facebook, is one where it's a broad audience. You can also be very targeted on that. It allows for video, but you don't have to be there like active 24/7. However, for Twitter, where it's information, where it's conversations, it is always on. And if what you're trying to do is for that level of engagement on a consistent basis and having conversations around certain topic is important, then Twitter would be best. Or at times, maybe it's just for you, photos are very compelling. Then maybe Instagram would then be the best platform to expand and grow a community base. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's more of which best suits your needs for the time of for the growth of your nonprofit. And then you may ask, what makes a good social story? It comes back down to the same three things for us: big inspiration, small information, and simple action. I'll show you a few examples in the next few slides. The next. Yes, so this is a screen grab from a video that we took. You can see how authentic the emotions were and how this moment was just captured at that point in time. This resonated with our audiences in a very strong way. But you can see is how genuine it is. The next slide also shows people as they are. Because then to online audience, they feel that, okay, it doesn't mean that someone needs to be high up there. It's everyday people, right? So this is a story that we told of someone who donated his bone marrow. And here is an ordinary guy just like you and me. If he can do it, you can also play a part. Next slide. So this is a very compelling portrait shot, and look at the copy that goes with it. The contrast that he's a fisherman, and then he gave out his nap time in the afternoons so that he can read to kids, and he set out a library in his home. So this is an example of how the text actually complements the visual, and the contrasting aspect, the interesting angles coming out. That's what engages audiences. The next slide. So social stories are really moments magnified. So have a think through for the day-to-day as you all interact with your volunteers as well as beneficiaries. What are the different moments? How are those moments captured? And how are those moments actually then shared? How they can be magnified in a way that presents the very core of how lives are impacted through the work that you do. And the next slide here are some tips or what we have seen that are important anchors, even as we share our stories on social media. First and foremost is being clear of whom you're talking to. What do you want to say? What's the objective of, let's say, your Facebook page? Determine the type of content strategy, and being clear about that will then guide you on the consistency, on the type of content, the tone of voice, and the style. And that many a times must be tied towards you being clear about who you are. So if you imagine your nonprofit as a person, how would this person behave? That will determine your tone of voice and the type of content that you would share on the platform. And third is being very real, because on social media it's about being human. So how would you communicate that? And it is social, it is two ways, it's conversational. So it's important to determine that and be consistent in it. And last but not least is being shareable. And it always ties back down to relevance. And as you keep, and on the social media space, it's always about testing and learning. As you try out different posts, you see the responses, those that work better than others, apply it, take down the insights and learnings, apply it again, and it's usually always an iterative process. Okay, next. And that's where you ask, does your audience like your story? As much as you see the engagement, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, you could actually look at insights from the data. You can see on the next slide. So the next slide actually shows how you can log in as admin, next slide, you could find out for your post which one gets most engagement, at what time when you actually post, which time of the day, for example, it works best. And the next slide. And so for us, it's always a constant process of optimizing what we do on social media, as well as insights that we gather. So we do test different thumbnails, we test different headlines, and it's always about saying quality of our content is so important. It does then result in the number of Facebook comments that come through and shares from our story. So we do look at all these different matrices, and just as how you would see it, sometimes it's not just liking of a post, but when someone then shares that, that is a testament that it resonated with someone to get someone to even want to share it, right? So what we have learned is that you cannot take it away from always iterating and learning and applying those. So our how-to checklist that we stand guided by is, as a recap, is what is your goal? Be very clear who your target audience is. And as you find your story, then find the best way to tell your story. And then where would you then share your story? And then find out, did the story work? Learn, apply the new insights, and then iterate again. All right, so this is an iterative process that you kind of have to go through. Next slide. And so we're happy if y'all would like to pitch your stories to us. This is on our website. indicate textbook webinar, where there's a list of questions on this page where we're always open for nonprofits in the region. If you feel that you've got a good story to tell, share that with us, and then we would evaluate it to see if that actually meets the focus areas that we're looking at, whether it's a compelling story, whether in terms of the mix of the story pipeline we have, that would be a fit. And this is where you can find us on social media, as well as our website, in terms of the stories that you could take a look at. So yes, that's where I have today. Leaving some time for Q&A. So welcome the questions that y'all would have.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that amazing presentation, Rebecca. Again, apologies on a bit of delay there. But we have powered through. So maybe for the questions, as they're filing in, I think it's good for me to kind of like raise the first question, if that's okay.
Yep.
So one of the bigger things I'm curious about is particularly on social media and on like Facebook Insights. Of course, you see there two things, engagement and reach. So of course, we're always after engagement, right? But how valuable is the number in reach, basically? So that's basically my question now. What is the value of that?
Okay. So for us, we always look at, there is a function where you reach. Okay, in the past, organic posts would give you a certain amount of reach, and right now you would have to put in some monies to even get a certain level of reach, right? Because you could have, let's say, the best piece of content, but it's not reaching your audiences, then that doesn't work. But we also recognize that you, as much as you need the reach to get eyeballs, but that's not enough. You need quality content for engagement. So I would say you need both. You can't do one without the other. And you also, because you can't say that, okay, I'll just want more reach, but if you don't have quality content, you can't engage. And you also can't say that the best quality of content, but with the realities of how digital space is, then it is not reaching the right people, then it also doesn't work. So you will need both.
Thank you. Actually, that is very enlightening, to be honest. And yeah, one of the biggest issues is that we can post something very easily and we can reach people very
Yeah.
easily, but it's actually how many people actually go back to that, share it, like it, or comment on it, or actually follow through with the action that we're asking. That's what actually matters.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah. And actually, perhaps I also wanna, there's maybe the question you had asked me earlier on the balance between sharing data, facts and figures, as versus intimate individual stories. And I think I've also interacted with a good number of nonprofits who say that many a times tend to say, okay, with impact X number of beneficiaries across how many years, across how many cities, and that tends to be what donors would look for. And that's true. However, we've also seen that when you complement these numbers with the stories of examples of lives being impacted, it really adds to it. And so my encouragement to the participants is that always be conscious about that mix, that information that you have on hand. And depending again on the target audience, depending, it could be to a donor, you may say facts and figures and numbers are important, but complement it also with how an example of a life that's been transformed. And so they could also imagine in their minds how that then is impact that's replicated across the numbers.
All right, so we actually have a few questions now coming in. So here's a very interesting one. So this is coming from a VWO that works with disadvantaged youth and their parents to promote stronger family ties. So if they're looking for donors, what kind of stories would resonate in that context to donors?
So, sorry, this VWO is working amongst
Low,
beneficiary.
yep, low income,
Again?
low income and disadvantaged youth and they're working
Use.
to establish better ties between the youth and their parents.
Mm. It will always be important to find out from for their existing donors. Actually, it will always come down to for any existing donors, why are they what matters to them and why are they giving? In understanding that, then you're able to say, okay, if let's say what resonates with them is that is this group of youth and how the relationships with their families have been impacted as a result of the programs of this VWO, right? Then is it finding a good story of an example where how these lives and how these family bonds have actually been improved, and then perhaps it's telling that story to then to bring in a larger donor base, because though it's not necessarily the case, but it could be that those who are already giving and understanding why they give, um, and telling a story that resonates with that could then bring you a new batch of donors. All right. Though of course at times it could be the case where you could be finding out why this group of donors would donate to you, but another group of donors could donate for different reasons. But whichever the case is, understanding the why and then finding the stories that most resonate with the why and telling that well.
Great. Actually, just to add to that, one other thing it's is worth looking into is if these donors already have an existing kind of like program that you could complement. So it's a matter of also auditing what are the stories that you have, like what are the success stories that you have, and if you can complement
Yep.
that to an existing program that these donors have, the better are the chances that actually you're going to be pushing through with partnership or of sorts.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
here's another interesting question actually. So, do we need more facts and figures to make the story compelling?
Which any story, right? And so I would say that, I mean, for us, we've found that when we do the stories, we have seen that the human emotions, engaging the human emotions, compl- is more of the big inspiration that will compel people to act. Having some info is important, but not overwhelming. People have also said to us that as we tell a strong human interest story, perhaps we could have shorter pieces of the facts and figures around it to complement it. So I would say I think you need both so far, and how do you marry both in a way that engages the right target audience is important. So sometimes it could be you could lead with the facts and figures, and then you kind of then tell the more compelling human interest angle. But depending on the audience, you could then instead lead with the human interest angle and then support it with numbers. So I would say you would really need to depend on the target audience and fine tune the balance accordingly and keep trying it in different um, weightage and different sequences and see what works best for the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yes, an interesting thing you can do here is because with Facebook Insights and other insights grabbing other insights tools is you can actually test this and get actual results. Test with maybe an emotional story here, then maybe test with an infographic here, with the same content basically, and you can see there which one resonates with your
Yeah,
audience.
exactly. Yes.
Okay, so here's another in line with Facebook. So, is a high number of reach okay aside from having an increased number of likes or shares? I think you've answered this earlier, but maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
reiterating. Yeah.
Mm. No, yeah, I would say both are important.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. As, yeah.
Okay, so moving forward. So, here's another one. Is using a paid ad okay, or is it something that you would suggest?
Yeah, so the thing about Facebook in the past, when we started off, it was pure in the past, just maybe 3, 4 years ago, everything was organic, right? Um, and as you put out an organic post, it can reach people. But the way Facebook has evolved, organic reach has completely plummeted. And what we have seen, that the flip side of that is we have to start putting in some paid ads, but it also doesn't mean that if you put in paid ads, you will get the results, because you need to be able to go very the good thing about Facebook is there's a good and a bad, right? The bad is that now you have to pay for it. The good thing is you can be very targeted. So if you're very clear which target audience you're looking for, so let's say you're looking for people who have got a passion in the area of education or children, it can be targeted based on interest. And if you're looking at a particular geographical area that you're looking for volunteers, then it can be a small amount that you can put in targeted Facebook ads, and that could give a targeted response and an outcome if you do that well. Because, and how we see Facebook ads, paid Facebook ads, as it's helping us to get the reach, but it doesn't take the work away from good quality content that will engage the audience, because you cannot pay for engagement. Right? So the Facebook ads would essentially help you to get you to the right target audience, but your quality of your content needs to then do the work of engaging them and drawing them into act.
That is a really good point. Yeah. So there, you should also. It's not just about, I mean, I think the point there is that paid ads could just get you seen, but it doesn't. It won't ensure that people will actually act on it. So
yes.
In line with that, actually, so what if an organization doesn't have budget for paid ads? So what are the recommendations that you think could help them get more exposure?
It will be two. I mean, I can think of two things. One is if you have a very strong volunteer base, and rallying a volunteer base to join your Facebook community, and essentially is if they are fully on board as a volunteer base, and you of course being clear about the objective of your Facebook page, have a very clear strategy and approach, and then the engagement from active core of volunteers could then be sending that to their network of friends, and so it could be in that way where if you're not depending on paid ads, then you have to depend on a strong core community who would engage, who would, but of course it's a function of, again, you have good content for them to share and engage with, right? Second, approach Facebook because I think they, though they don't have a special program actually for nonprofits, but we know that there are some individuals in Facebook who are actually keen to support nonprofits, perhaps with some ad credits. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So in line with, actually, a lot of these are pretty much social media based, actually. So another question is, if an NGO is working with a group of people, basically their demographic aren't tech savvy, what are other suggestions that you could provide to help them reach them and or inspire them to go digital?
Sorry, the question is of people whom they work with, means the beneficiaries or their supporters?
So these are primarily, oh, sorry, this is their target audience. So I would say it's more on beneficiaries, perhaps.
Huh? Beneficiary
Or
or target audience?
yes.
Target. So that means they work essentially with people, but with people who are not tech savvy. But this would be in the case of potential supporters, right?
Correct. Yes. So how could they kind of like what are the other alternatives that they can do to actually reach out to them and in a way inspire them to go digital?
Yeah, so if let's say your potential supporter base is not very digitally inclined to start off with, and you already have let's say an existing base, and you want to grow your base of supporters, whether it's volunteers, whether it's donors. And I guess traditionally many nonprofits tend to do this in fundraiser events or offline organized events where existing donors and supporters would then invite friends to come along. Many a times it tends to be word of mouth, right? But if the intent is that you want to draw people into the digital part, then it's organizing these events that engage people where they are, asking them to bring their friends along. But the content of the program would still be along the lines of what you're sharing is about the stories of the lives of beneficiaries impacted, about the numbers of what's the scale of your impact. And perhaps then it's through events like this, saying that this building a core who would say, okay, amongst that, maybe there will be some of them who are more digitally inclined to say, we want to be able to take this forward on the digital space too. We have a Facebook group, would you join? So using an offline event to bring awareness of um, the, the digital engagement opportunities online and getting them to come on board.
Right.
But again, it is very much dependent on understanding who these people are. If they are really not digitally savvy at all, and it's going to be a real hurdle to even get them on the digital space, and yet you know that these are the largest potential of supporters and donors, then perhaps the whole strategy cannot be digital. It would have to be a series of offline events that keeps this group of donors and supporters growing and engaged. But if, let's say, for this VWO, the assessment is that, well, there is a potential for a larger potential of a digital online community to come alongside support, then that would need to be an approach of bridging from events to an offline. I think it still comes back down to a strategic focus, like understanding who is most likely to be that new pipeline of donors and supporters coming in, and then customizing the approaches of engaging and reaching them, whether it's offline or whether it's digitally.
All right, yeah, and I think the key word there is really customizing and understanding who your demographic is. So, uh, not everything can be successfully done socially. I like the point where Rebecca raised that you can do it offline. There's no harm in that, as long as it works for your audience. All right, so
Though I would also say that, but sometimes we also don't want to get into mode where, because we've been doing it in this way for so long, that you don't know whether an online part could work, right? So it's always worth trying out, testing out. And if those results don't show, then okay, at least it's been tried out.
agree.
Because then it may mean that how you've been doing it offline all this while has been limiting where it could potentially go. It's that consideration of whether it's worth a shot to try. And if to try digitally, it also then requires a concerted effort to try that for a while. And if after trying for that while it doesn't work, then okay, at least you've tried it, you know.
All right, so actually, in line with that again, so if you're an organization who's only starting to to look into social media, what would be the most popular that they should start first with?
Like I said, the social media platforms would be dependent, like each one has got a different like their strengths and weakness for each of these social media platforms. It's important to ask yourself for the objective and purpose of why you want to engage on social media, which platform suits you best. Like I said, if your nonprofit lends itself with very powerful visuals, would then Instagram be a place to start off and start engaging people? right? Or if you feel that maybe it's not the visuals, but maybe you have got some videos, you're able to from a broad, you want a broad base audience, people who are on it, then it's Facebook. At times, if you feel that, oh, it's conversations that you kind of a point of view that you want to bring out, then maybe it's Twitter. So it needs to be assessed based on what you need as a nonprofit. And then just choose one and grow in that. Because doing well in one or even testing out one requires a commitment and a certain amount of resources in terms of time.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I think I'd like to kind of like put some emphasis on that. Social media isn't something that you can just try out. You actually really need to dedicate some time and some effort to it for it to be successful. Now,
Yeah.
moving away from social media now into something more related to video. So, a quick question is that for those who do not have Adobe video editing skills, is there a free online video editor that you could suggest?
Mm. Okay, I could get back to you on that. We
Okay.
could actually check on, I can't remember the specific one, but I can check with my team and I could get back on that.
That is a little tricky, yeah, because
They are free too.
yep.
Yeah,
I think from my end,
yeah,
one thing worth looking into is actually mobile apps. That's the easiest way
yeah,
that you can kind of like work
yes,
around the requirements and like the training factor.
yes, yes.
All right, so this is a bit of a long question. Sorry. So, this is an NGO. So, this is basically from Habitat for Humanity Singapore. Our main work
Yep,
revolves around providing decent shelter to low-income families by building houses. So, we often struggle
yep.
with the balance of sharing content in two types of stories because the work is so different. Any advice for organizations with diverse scope of work? So, to add to that, sorry, they work with providing decent shelter to low-income families, and at the other end, they also provide uh, so they also provide services for local elderly, providing them with sanitary homes and home cleaning programs. So,
Mm,
are there like tips that you could suggest to organizations such as this that has like a diverse range of services?
mm. So actually, the reality is that when an organization has diverse range of services, it tends to be then be very clear what those areas are. In this case, I hear two different types of services. I mean, one is for the elderly, one is for low income families houses, right? Then be very clear that these are the two services that are being provided, and stories, and if, from a communication standpoint, capturing stories on both aspects would then be important. So it all comes down to whether you're communicating on your social media platform or on your website, how it then comes through that is not confusing, because I'm sure that between the two types of services that's provided, it comes back down to a very fundamental core, which is providing good homes or affordable or living homes for people. So whether they are elderly or whether they are low income, right? So I think as long as the core doesn't get like remains as the core, and the expression of the variety of stories across the different services can get told in different ways, so people then receiving that wouldn't get confused. Does that make sense? That
Yes, no problem there. So I think
yeah,
another thing to add there is it's a lot of NGOs actually have a diverse set of roles and different
yeah,
set of services.
exactly.
So that is actually pretty normal. One thing you just need to consider is to be consistent with your tone and
Yeah.
how you're promoting these. You should, I mean, are you always positive about it? Do you want to show like the gritty side of the reality? I think being consistent with the tone and the content, that's one of the biggest factors, I think.
Which I will add on to say, it always comes down to, so for us in our better world, right? And for any nonprofit out there, it's always important to ask yourself, let's define our brand personality. If imagine Habitat for Humanity is a person, what does this person like? Attributes around that person, etc. Right? And the very core values of what this person stands for.
Agreed.
And once you nail that down, and you're clear about it, it will translate. And then, of course, then in the stories that you tell, how you tell it, how you communicate, the tone of voice, everything must be guided by that. And you keep asking yourself, is this then the brand voice that needs to be expressed? Is this how it needs to be expressed? A choice of words? I know it's easier said than done, but that is a very important consciousness that we take upon ourselves. And I think it's a very important aspect for every nonprofit, so that to an audience, you don't sound confused, that you sound coherent, and each piece of story or content that you put out reinforces and builds on the last one.
All right, so another question now.
Yeah.
This is more in line with fundraising now. So this is a charity that trains volunteers that basically help seniors, frail seniors. So they need to fundraise to continue their program. So what are the tips that you can share without? What are the tips that you can share to help them fundraise and make it sound a little sensitive without being overly too aggressive with the ask?
I guess the fundraise, whether it's again through offline events or whether it's online, I think it's coming down to how would you tell the story to engage more people to contribute, right? If that's the case, that's always the thing of, are you doing a hard sell, or um, or are you actually staying true to why you do what you do? So take for example, I think in the best way or best approach would be the very core of why these services are provided to the elderly, how lives of these elderly have been transformed, of the beneficiaries who are benefited, which stories actually are the most compelling, and which ones can be told in a way that, okay, it shouldn't be told in a way that is manipulative or sob story type, but it can be told in a dignified way, right? And I think that if that comes through, whether through online or through an event, I think if people resonate with that story and can see the impact that the center does, and then making very clear, making it bite-sized to say, these are the ways you can contribute. So if in terms of fundraising, then it's saying, okay, at different levels, right, different tiers of you can contribute $100, and then this would help. I think it always helps donors, whereas $100 can help what give this aspect, or $500 can then do this, or even to say, if you want to do this on a 6-month basis or an annual basis, every month, break it down for people and saying what the money is actually gonna help do, that will serve the overall purpose, and that would help. So I think in summary, my 2 main points is, you have to still find a compelling story that tells the story in a dignified way, that is not pushy, that is not preachy, tells it as it is. Second is the take action. What you're asking from the potential donors needs to be accessible and bite-sized, or essentially you need to then say, this will actually help, so they can see how their help will result in support and benefit to the beneficiaries.
Awesome. All right. So going back to social media now, another interesting question here is that they've actually this attendee actually went through your social media pages of Our Better World, and they're very impressed with
Yeah.
the engagement of the page. How it creates meaningful conversations. So they're asking,
Yeah.
would you attribute this success to your team actually actively maintaining this conversation by responding and commenting, or are there other tips that you can share as well?
Yeah, so my team, actually for us, before we roll out any story on social media, there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes. Um, there's a lot of thought that goes into, of course, the whole process from finding the story, telling the story, but the conversation on what can work on social media also happens before the story is being shot or produced, because we take all those into consideration. And then we're already thinking, in the story level, we're already thinking which target audience will likely resonate with this best. And we're already thinking that, okay, perhaps a more bite-sized story for this could lead to the bigger story, etc. Right? Um, and so that when we do launch on, so there's a strategy and approach for each story to then say that if this is the call to action we're looking for, this is the headline, this is the thumbnail, um, these are the different posts that we would have. What, because many a times you cannot put everything in one post. One post needs to serve one purpose. Okay, and then collectively maybe 5 posts will lead people to different aspects of the campaign. And the team is constantly looking out at the comments that come through and responding to that, because for someone to take time to comment, it is our responsibility to then respond to them, right? And that's where it's an opportunity to engage, because then it comes back down to Our Better World being a person. We'll be happy when people talk to us and we'll respond, right? So it is a function of the team always being there to respond quickly to the comments, making conversation. Um, but I would just add to it that a lot of planning and hard work happens even before that, to prepare. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question to that. So this is something I've been very curious about. So when somebody comments or responds, what is like the acceptable amount of time for delay? Is like responding the next day, is that still okay? Is there like a kind of like
Yeah.
an is there like a baseline
Oh,
for that?
I guess we try to respond within 24 hours,
Oh,
and
that's a good
sometimes
thing.
less than that.
Yeah,
Sometimes less than that, right? But sometimes it depends on the volume of comments we get too.
correct. And
I
then
mean, and actually, yeah. So as much as we would like it to be instantaneous, as much as for that also delights our audience. Say, oh, you're on it, you know. So it's as soon as possible. The max is okay, one day. Yeah.
So here's another question. Now, when they're looking into their beneficiaries, what if their beneficiary is not a good storyteller? Take, for example, they're not comfortable with a camera or is a little shy. Are there any inputs that you can share to ensure the authenticity of the story?
Yeah, so we also come across beneficiaries who are not going in front of camera. Then we ask ourselves, are there other ways to tell the story? Is there a real story? Like, first of all, is there a really compelling story in there? What is it about the story that stands out? After we define that, then we say, okay, are there different ways to tell that story? So a recent story we told, you can see it on our website, is of uh, this girl who started Project We Forgot. Um, is of how she was a young caregiver to her father who had Alzheimer's disease. It's not that she doesn't look good in front of camera. Okay, this is not a case of that, but this is an example where if someone's not good in front of camera, is what you could think of differently. We wanted to try a different way of storytelling instead of just interviewing her. We then thought, hers is a very powerful story. Why don't we get her to write a letter to her dad who's passed away and ask her to read out the letter? You can tell from the audio that was recorded, it was a very powerful story. Then what we did is then we complemented the audio with animation. And that's how her story got told in a different way instead of her being in front of the camera.
Right.
So this can be applied to story subjects where you can't show their faces. Yeah, there are many different ways. Or it can, yeah, just different ways, different formats of storytelling that can be applied.
Okay. So now we're actually down to the last question, and for the interest of time, unfortunately, we can no longer accommodate additional questions. So the last
Mm-hmm.
question is, when you mentioned big inspiration, small information, and simple action, could you elaborate more on small information? So what is small information?
Okay, I'll use the example of the video that showed just now of Kathy, right, of the dorsal effect. The small information is you know that it's in Lombok, right? You know that this is what Kathy is trying to do in saving sharks by giving the egg shark fishermen alternative source of livelihood. It's a big inspiration in how she does it, right? In the way it's captured. But we don't put in more further information by saying, oh, so how many, how far is it from the airport, or how many sharks are, I mean, we did say upfront how many sharks are being killed, but are being hunted. But the extent of the whole issue of sharks, and if you don't do this now, you know, you're gonna be sharks will be endangered or whatever. We didn't go too much into all of that. We could have, but we felt that that was what we meant by a little of that info, but go big on the inspiration part could work better. Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, that is about it. Rebecca, thank you so much for spending some time with us. And
No problem. I hope it was useful. Yeah.
before we end, though, I just like one last reminder to the attendees. Part of this campaign, why Rebecca has also helped us, is because we're running a Story Makers campaign. That is a celebration of the stories of your work as charities, as NGOs. So if you are interested in winning about up to $10,000 in cash, please do submit a 1 to 5 minute video of your work. I will be sharing the instructions over the post session email along with the resources used here. And again, thank you so much, Rebecca. Any last kind of like a goodbye message or something?
No, I just encourage everyone. I think all of you have got lots of stories, good stories. You're on a treasure trove of stories because of the good work that y'all do with the community. So just start in very practical ways. If there are aspects of what I shared today, they find it useful, just start in small steps, right? It doesn't always need to be, oh, you need every single thing to be in place. Start small steps, see where that works, and keep at it and keep learning from it. Yep,
Awesome. All right. Again,
that's
thank
it.
you so much. And with that in mind, have a nice day, everyone. And we will talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.